We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Australians are hurting. Fuel prices are up by over 50%. Service stations are running dry. Farmers can't farm. Truckies can't truck. Miners can't mine. The cost of food is set to rise. Vital health services are at risk. When is the Prime Minister finally going to show leadership and fix this national crisis?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. And indeed, the government not only accepts responsibility, we're taking action. Earlier today, those opposite said that we should bring on legislation for a vote, and then when we did, they voted against it. Then when we did, we voted against it.
Order.
Sound familiar?
Member Karoon.
Sound familiar? It's exactly what they did between December and January. What we've done is introduced new laws to double penalties for petrol companies for price gouging. We've convened the National Cabinet. We've appointed a National Fuel Supply Task Coordinator. We've begun release of the 20% of Australia's fuel reserves. We've changed petrol standards to get more fuel flowing. We've changed diesel standards so Australian refineries can supply more diesel. We've tasked the ACCC to ramp up fuel price monitoring and issue on-the-spot fines. We've engaged with international partners to keep supply flowing. We've engaged with the states and territories on supply and distribution, including we've held one meeting in the National Cabinet. There'll be another one on Monday. We're holding a special energy ministers meeting. We've activated the National Coordination Mechanism, which has met twice. We've convened the National Oil Supplies Emergency Committee 6 times. We've unlocked money for financial counselling funding for impacted farmers. We've changed the law to make it easier for Australia's refineries to access government funding when they run at a loss, and ensured that the 2 refineries that remained after their period in office can keep going into the future. We've fixed the fuel security services payment to make it easier for Australia's refineries to access government funding. We've changed the law so the Fair Work Commission can demand companies that pay truckies fairly when fuel prices spike. As people have said, those opposite have said, the Shadow Treasurer said, there are a lot of events outside of our control, recognition that there's this world conflict going on that is having an impact here. Now, don't come in here and pretend that that doesn't exist. We understand. We understand that it's real, and we understand that it makes a difference. And coming in here and pretending that this conflict, which we do not know when it will end, we hope it ends soon, is not having an impact right around the globe, is frankly just treating people like mugs. We know it's having an impact. We know it's having an impact. And others have said that as well. With maybe they could take the advice of the former leader of the National Party. People just need to calm themselves down, is what he said. Maybe he's talking about his colleagues.
Has concluded. Order. Order. The call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. With the war in the Middle East impacting global supply chains, how is the Albanese Labor government working across the board, including with industry, to support Australia's fuel security and supply? What has been the response?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Canberra for her question, ably assisted by young Joseph. And I congratulate her on expanding her family. Now, we understand, indeed, that all Australian families at the moment, business and farmers, are feeling the impact of the ongoing war in the Middle East. The government is working with partners across the board, taking action on Australia's fuel security and supply, whether it's with state and territory governments, whether it be with international partners or with industry. A calm, steady, fact-based approach is what we are focused on, because we want Australia to be over-prepared I want us to have the strongest possible plan so we're ready for what may come. And indeed, it's been supported by industry. The BCA CEO, Bram Black, said this: Australia's companies are working collaboratively with government, and that's the point that I want to stress. This is a time where we really do need to adopt a Team Australia moment. It's only by working together that we'll get through it. Andrew McKellar from ACCI. We've seen a number of steps that the government are taking in terms of getting consultation with industry. Went on to say, National Cabinet, the appointment of Anthea Harris as the National Fuel Supply Task Force Coordinator, the things that they've done in terms of fuel standards and releasing some of those reserves. The National Farmers Federation, we acknowledge the global factors at the core of these issues and that the need for a calm and considered approach to supply chain issues is imperative. That's what the actual farmers have said through the NFF.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. There is just far too much noise.
On these matters, we also act transparently. On Sunday, the minister reported that 6 out of the 81 ships which were due in April had been cancelled. I can confirm to the House that of those 6 cancelled ships, all have been replaced, and suppliers continue securing more cargoes. That's what we're doing, actually getting things done, while those opposite behave as if they're unaware that there is a war in the Middle East and can't believe there are consequences of it.
Order.
On Monday, we'll convene the National Cabinet to ensure as well that we get that coordination across the levels of government. Now, my message to Australians remains: do not take more fuel than you need. As a government, we are prepared so we can shield Australians from the worst of global uncertainty. The best way to do that is for all of us to keep working together in the national interest, and we'll continue to do that with industry, with international partners, with state and territory governments, even if those opposite want to not be a part of that coordinated action.
Give a call to a member for Line.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Anna, a single mum from Croydon Park in the Prime Minister's electorate, told 2GB this morning, and I quote, "I was driving my kids to their sports carnival today panicking, driving past 5 fuel stations with no fuel. What do I do if there's no fuel? What if my kids get sick and I can't pick them up?" End quote. When will the Prime Minister finally take action to ensure fuel gets to his own constituents?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Line for her question, and indeed the comments from Anna in Croydon Park, of course, are real, because people out there are facing a difficult circumstance. The government acknowledges that. We don't come in here and say there's not a war. We don't come in here and say there aren't issues of distribution. What we do is come in here and put forward practical plans to make a difference. And that is the responsible thing to do. And that is what the then Morrison government did during the difficulties of COVID, backed by the then opposition.
Order.
At a time where there are international factors that have an impact, then it is the responsible thing to do to work together, as we are with industry, as we are with state and territory governments. And indeed, the comments of those opposite, whether it be Senator Canavan, the latest leader of the Nationals, obviously our prices will be impacted by the world price, whether it be
Prime Minister will pause. The member for Line on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the question did not relate to anything that the opposition has said. It's about what action is being taken to get fuel to his own constituents.
Yes, and the order and the type of question was a question regarding a topic, and the Prime Minister has addressed multiple parts of the question in terms of his answer. he's obviously reading some comments about the topic he was asked from the party that he was asked as well. The order. Well, if there is a relevant point of order regarding relevance, the Prime Minister's got to make his remarks relevant to whether he's quoting a leader or another member of the House or the Senate about what he was asked about. And at this stage he's doing that, but I'm going to listen carefully to make sure that he is. Yeah.
I would just like to be clear, though, just because the member is a member of the National Party.
Yeah. Oh, well, resume your seat. That's why I said what I followed with my comments. So I said, yes, if he's commenting a leader or a member regarding the member's party or leader, he's got to make his remarks relevant to the question that he was asked from that member. It's a fairly common sense thing, I would suggest. The Prime Minister in continuation, and he'll make his remarks directly relevant.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I also refer to my previous answer where I outlined all of the measures that the government has taken, which are all about assisting Anna from Croydon Park and assisting, indeed, constituents wherever they are around Australia. But the idea that the context doesn't matter, that we can just wish away the impact that this is having right around the world is, of course, absurd. And that is what has been recognised across the board by members of the member for Lyon's own party. The member for Page said, "I'd stress to people not necessarily to do that, panic buy. We obviously have reserve supplies," is what he went on to say. "We're all hoping for an early conclusion to this conflict." That is what the member for Page had to say, and he was right. One of the many former members of the leaders of the National Party over there also said the big message for every Australian is don't panic. The suppliers are there. We all have a role to play in that. Stick to our normal daily operations and schedules, and don't think that we have to always keep topping up. The fuel is coming. That was a responsible former leader once removed of the National Party. The former National Party leader twice removed said a similar thing when he said people just need to calm themselves down. This government will continue to operate in an orderly way because that's how you get things done.
Order. The member for Bowen will leave the chamber under 94A. Interjecting 13 times in 4 questions is way too many times. Now the House has come to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to get fuel where it needs to go?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my friend and very valued neighbour and South West Sydney colleague, the member for Werriwa, for the question. And, Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister has indicated, supply to our country does remain strong. Of the 6 ships that we informed the nation that had been cancelled on the weekend, all have been replaced with alternative supplies from alternative countries, and at least 3 other spot cargo offers have been confirmed and on their way to Australia. That's a good thing, and our 2 refineries are working full pelt with all their production exclusively for Australian use, and that is certainly, Mr Speaker, the way it should be at this situation. Now, that is not to say, Mr Speaker, of course, as the government has always recognised, that there aren't real shortages, particularly in regional areas, that need to be addressed. And what we're dealing with is a couple of things, and it's important to run through for the House. We saw demand increase very dramatically, and we saw suppliers, not unreasonably and in fact lawfully and legally, making sure that they supplied petrol to the people who had ordered in advance, i.e. people on contract. People in the spot market have not been able to be supplied at the same rate as those contracts are honoured in the first instance. There's people who ordered petrol in advance under the contract system. But we have been working very hard, Mr Speaker, and I do want to take this opportunity to say there are a lot of people working hard at the moment. People in refineries, truckies, people in my department, people in state departments working very hard, long hours, to try and see these shortages addressed. And on behalf of the government, I want to say thank you to them. Now, Mr Speaker, I can report to the House that today Ampol has advised me, for example, their year-on-year supplies to regional Australia and their supplies to independent distributors. For example, March this year compared to March last year, 40% higher to independent suppliers in regional New South Wales, 33% higher in regional Queensland, 66% higher in South Australia, 22% higher in Tasmania, 19% higher in Victoria and 64% higher in Western Australia. That's Ampol supplies to independent distributors. And their supplies in total, including to their own retail outlets, are up, for example, 34% in New South Wales and up 44% in South Australia. I would have thought members from regional South Australia would welcome that, Mr Speaker, and up 27% in total. Now, that does not mean there aren't shortages, as we're dealing with the increased demand and with recovering as the supply chain recovers, as it had to during COVID in so many instances. When you get a big increase in demand, it takes time for the supply chain to recover, to backfill the existing demand. But the fact that the supply to regional Australia is up substantially shows that the measures this government has put in place with industry, working closely in collaboration with the states, are seeing real progress, Mr Speaker, which is what Australians so desperately deserve and are receiving.
For Parks. Give a call to a member for New England.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Look, despite what my question is to the Minister for Agriculture, despite the answer for the Minister for Energy from funeral homes, we're actually being contacted now by funeral homes that can't get fuels, and certainly farmers. So does the Minister for Agriculture see any impediments for the production, processing and transport of crucial food, crucial groceries to metropolitan supermarkets? And if you do see any problems, what is your contingency plan?
The call to the Minister for Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member opposite. I also want to thank all of my colleagues behind me who have been representing farmers and primary producers and talking to me about some of the challenges that they have been hearing in their electorate, because we do acknowledge that there are challenges, particularly for our farmers, our fishers and our primary producers, which is why I'm meeting with them on a regular basis to hear directly from them about what is happening on the ground and so that we can address the challenges that they are experiencing. As I have said in this place, we are working with them in terms of fertiliser. We've also, as you would be well aware, we can produce enough food in this country to more than feed the Australian people, which is why we currently export around 80% of our primary produce in terms of value. So the member opposite shouldn't be panicking people when it comes to food supply in this country. We will continue to work with our farmers in relation to fuel and fertiliser. Our government has already taken action, as the Minister and the Prime Minister has outlined.
The Minister's concluded her answer. Give the call to the honourable member. Give the call to a member for Gorton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to secure our fuel supply, and how are we keeping our transport industry strong during this fuel spike? What has been the response?
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you. Can I thank the member for Gorton for her question, but also thank her for her advocacy for a great freight route, the Western Highway, that runs right along the spine of both of our electorates. This morning I again met with representatives from the transport and fuel sector. We are ensuring that government, industry, suppliers and unions are operating from the same information so that when we need to move quickly, we can. As a government, we have, so far, released 20% of the minimum stockholding obligation for petrol and diesel, particularly directing it to regional communities. We've appointed the Fuel Supply Task Force Coordinator, Anita Harris, to work with states and industry to ensure fuel keeps flowing to where it is needed. We've amended the fuel standards for petrol and now the flashpoint for diesel to make sure that we can get more supply onto the market. We've passed legislation just before in the House to strengthen the ACCC's hands, and we continue to monitor airlines and airfares closely. We're working with regional partners like Singapore and Korea to shore up supplies, strengthen our energy security and support the flow of essential goods. The PM, of course, will hold another National Cabinet on the fuel supply to ensure that we're getting that coordinated response right the way across the country on Monday. We said we would move quickly to introduce changes to the House to the Fair Work Act to ensure that our truck drivers and our logistics companies can quickly renegotiate their rates with Australia's major retailers. And today we moved to do just that, because our freight industry cannot bear the cost of increased fuel prices alone. Because a strong transport sector, it ensures our food moves from our farms to our tables, goods from warehouses to our shop fronts and fuel from our refineries to our petrol bowsers. And to ensure that the transport industry remains strong, they need to have the levers to adjust quickly to what we know is a changing environment. And our amendments have been welcomed by the Australian Trucking Association, National Road Floaters Association, Road Transport Association and the TWU. They told us they were vital and urgent. But we know who didn't seem to welcome the urgency of these amendments. It was those opposite. When this was brought up for debate today, their argument was that they couldn't possibly support a quicker contract train order because we were moving too fast. The member for Cook said that he'd spoken to a couple of trucking companies who were worried about going insolvent, and then he and his Liberal colleagues literally again scuttled out of this chamber instead of voting for these changes that the trucking industry have called as being urgent. The Leader of the Opposition, who's busy there interjecting, couldn't even be bothered to turn up for the debate at all. Our parliament has been asked to act to support the trucking industry. They might have a lot of people with leader in their title over there opposite, but they are surely lacking in leadership when it comes to what is an important issue for our truck industry.
Call to the Honourable the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How many service stations in Australia are currently out of fuel, and will the Minister commit to publicly releasing daily updates of individual service stations that have run out of fuel? And if not, why not?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. New South Wales today, 178 with no diesel, 48 with no stock, a total stock out. Queensland, 55 with no diesel, 33 with no regular unleaded. Victoria, 45 with no diesel, that's down 20, and 72 with no unleaded, that's down 70. South Australia, 9 with no diesel, 10 with no unleaded. Western Australia, 40 with no diesel, 14 with no unleaded. Tasmania, 5 with no diesel, 9 with some sort of outage. No outages in the Northern Territory that are attributable to a lack of fuel supply. In the ACT, currently 2 with no diesel and 1 with no unleaded, but as I said yesterday, I'm advised that these shortages in the ACT are typically dealt with within the hour. Now, Mr Speaker, I will continue, as appropriate, to be giving the Australian people updates, as I have done for the last month, Mr Speaker, as do state premiers. This data is collected. This data is collected primarily by the states. It's shared. The Commonwealth data that is shared with the states regularly. The states share data with me regularly, and of course premiers are providing daily updates as well.
Call to the honourable member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How are Australia and Germany strengthening cooperation between our defence forces and our defence industries, and why is this important?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his great contribution as the government's Special Envoy for Defence. This morning I had the very real pleasure of meeting with my good friend Boris Pistorius, the German Minister for Defence. Germany is the third largest economy in the world with a growing defence budget. It is already far and away the largest contributor in support of Ukraine, and it is becoming one of the major defence players in the world. And given we share values, we have deep trust, the German-Australian defence relationship is profoundly important. And as Minister Pistorius has said Germany is also a country which supports the global rules-based order, an order which gives agency to middle powers like Australia, an order which is very much, therefore, in our national interest. And precisely because the order is under pressure, it is an order which must be defended and spoken for right now, which is why we are so appreciative of the comments that Minister Pistorius and, for that matter, President von der Leyen have made in Canberra this week. Now, our relationship has an operational dimension. In 2023, when we sent our first E-7 to Europe in support of Ukraine, it operated out of the Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and in turn Germany participated in Exercise Talisman Sabre here last year, and it will do so again with its Eurofighters in Exercise Pitch Black in Darwin in July. Today we signed a letter of intent to cooperate in respect of space, because space domain awareness is a critical part of modern military capability. There is also a very significant defence industry dimension to the relationship. Rheinmetall, a German company, has established a facility in Brisbane which is providing high-skilled, high-wage jobs in your electorate, Mr Speaker, where it is building combat reconnaissance vehicles, the Boxers, for both the German and the Australian armies. And when Minister Pistorius visits Brisbane tomorrow, we will sign a letter of cooperation with TDW, a German company which will be involved in the manufacture of missiles here in Australia. We are on opposite sides of the globe, but in an increasingly connected world, the German-Australian defence relationship is becoming more and more important, and that is fantastic, because Germany is a reliable and trusted friend of Australia.
To the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy. Shane from Penrith told me, quote, "The way things are going, I won't be able to afford to go to work. It's either pay the bills and starve or eat and not pay the bills." That's the end of his quote. Minister, when will the government take action to ensure that fuel gets to where it needs to go so that Australians like Shane don't have to choose between eating and driving? And why won't the minister commit to daily updates of individual service stations that have run out of fuel?
A call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for a question. I would say to Shane, as I'd say to the honourable member, as I say to the House, this government has been taking action since the 28th of February to ensure that our nation deals with this very difficult international situation in a way which makes sure that Australians have confidence that they have supply and that the supply that comes to Australia is distributed to them, Mr Speaker, and that's what we've been doing. Now, we've always said, in relation to the honourable member talks about petrol prices, we've always said, as my predecessors have said, as has long been the situation for energy ministers and treasurers to consistently say, because it happens to be true, the biggest impact on petrol prices will be oil prices internationally. That will always be the case, and oil prices are high for pretty obvious reasons. That would be the case regardless of who is in office. In relation, the honourable member put a lot into the question, to be fair. In relation to service station updates, I've been giving those each day, more than happy to do so. And I would point out to the House that every state has an app or a website where service station information is available, Mr Speaker, and every state collects that. Every state collects that as a matter of law. If honourable members want to argue for a national system, that has been tried before, Mr Speaker, and I seem to recall who was for it and who was against it.
The call to the honourable member for Menzies.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Can the minister provide clarity about the arrival control determination regarding Iranian visitor visas? Who is affected and who is not affected? And who will be shown compassion in sympathetic cases?
Give the call to the Leader of the House and the Minister for Immigration and Citizenship.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Menzies for the question and want to acknowledge the extraordinary work he's been doing with the Iranian Australian community in his electorate. and acknowledge the consultation that both the Assistant Minister for Multicultural Affairs and the Assistant Minister for Immigration have been doing, as well as myself, with the community in the lead-up to making the determination which I signed off on yesterday. It's very important for us to understand what this determination is, who it affects, who it doesn't, and why the government has put it in place. It is always the case when temporary visas are issued that one of the things that my officials weigh up is how likely is it that someone will seek to continue to stay beyond the length of the visa. And what that means is when you get a sudden conflict, like has happened with Iran, you have a large number of people who've been issued visas who, if they applied now, would in fact not be eligible for those visas. And until these determinations were possible, we could only go through that case by case. And this is the first time that I know of for a long time where the number of visas that were already issued was as large as this, in the order of more than 7,000 temporary visas that had already been issued. All of them issued properly, but in a circumstance which no longer applied. And the government has a very clear view that decisions about permanent stays in Australia should be a deliberate decision of the government, not a random consequence of who was planning to book a holiday here. In terms of who is affected, the order only applies to people with visitor visas. We have not applied it to any other form of temporary visa. It does not apply to the spouse, de facto partner or dependent child of an Australian citizen. It does not apply to somebody who holds a permanent visa. It does not apply to anybody who is already here. It does not apply to the parent of a child who is under 18 in Australia. It doesn't apply to somebody who has what we call a permitted travel certificate. Now, these travel certificates, because there will be members of parliament who are approached and asked to bring these cases forward, and I just want to explain what they are. The department is still able, where there are compelling circumstances, to say that individual should be able to come on the visitor visa. But those decisions are made case by the department. I have directed the department, as a result of the consultation that I referred to before, including some specific advocacy that came from the member for Menzies, the member for Deakin and the member for Bennelong, to specifically ask my officials to show sympathetic consideration for any cases that involve the parents of Australian citizens, regardless of the age of the Australian citizens. But obviously the compassionate circumstances will be broader than that. But it's just very important. I wanted to have the chance to, and grateful for the chance for the member for Menzies to explain who it applies to, who it doesn't, and what the pathway is for sympathetic consideration.
We'll go to the next question. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the Special Visitors Gallery today is a delegation from the Australian Political Exchange Council 16 delegation from the Philippines, led by the Honourable Congressman Charisse Ann Hernandez. Welcome to you all. Give the call to the member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Given the Minister's advice today that more than 500 petrol stations are without at least one type of fuel across Australia, can the Minister guarantee that Australians planning to travel to the regions to see their families over Easter will be able to fill up their cars to come home? And why won't the Minister commit to daily updates of individual service stations that run out of fuel?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. And I reiterate the figures I revealed earlier in question time. For example, Ampol's distribution to regional Queensland, for example, which is up very substantially year on year, which shows the entire industry is working hard to catch up with the massive spike in demand that we saw after the 28th of February. And I would have thought the honourable member would welcome that increase in supply and recognise that it is working and will work to deal with those shortages, which we all agree are unacceptable. And that's, as I said, there are so many people working so hard across government and across industry, collaboratively, to see this dealt with. And that is helpful, Mr Speaker. I will tell the House what is unhelpful, Mr Speaker, is not recognising that Australia's fuel supply is secure, is not accepting the fact that the ships that have been cancelled have been replaced, is misleading Australians that somehow some of the fuel from our refineries is being exported at the moment, which just isn't true, Mr Speaker, somehow linking it to net zero. That is all untrue and unhelpful, Mr Speaker. This is a time for the nation to come together. And Mr Speaker, And, Mr Speaker, we'll be working hard and are working hard and have been working hard to ensure Australians have access to fuel not only over Easter, which the honourable member just asked me about, but—
Has the minister concluded his answer? The manager on a point of order.
Yeah, it's a very specific question. It asks for a guarantee and whether you will provide public data about individual service stations. Why the needless secrecy?
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, just to raise again that it now has to be deliberate from the Manager of Opposition Business to continually take points of order to pretend to the House that not all of the elements of a question were part of the question when he's raising points of order on direct relevance.
The manager is entitled to raise his point of order and he's doing his job, but I just ask him when he's doing his job to ensure that the standing orders are being followed. And the minister is in mid-flight when he's talking about Easter, and he was specifically asked about the petrol supplies during Easter and what the minister was doing about that. It's very difficult, and I give some leeway to the manager because of the position he has, but I just ask all of members to respect the standing orders, and you can't pick and choose which part of the question you think has been answered or hasn't been answered. It's always been done in a total environment. So just going to make the order, but I'll make sure the manager is respected with his points of order, and I'm going to make sure the minister is also respected with his answer, because he is being directly relevant to the question that he was asked, and I'll ask him to continue.
Thank you, sir. I was making the point that the government has been working not just in the lead-up to Easter, and we will continue to work in the lead-up to Easter, and of course we'll all be working, Mr Speaker, during Easter with the industry to make sure that's the case. In relation to updates, I've provided updates in the House each day. No doubt I'll do that next week. No doubt I'll be active in the public over the weekend, Mr Speaker. I'll be answering questions as I have done many, many days since the 28th of February. I will also point out that premiers are doing the same. That's a good thing. Premier Minns is providing a daily update on service station closures in his state, Mr Speaker. That's appropriate. The information gathering powers that his state, I welcome the action he's taken. I do point out that every single state runs a service station website which has information available to them, Mr Speaker. There was a chance a few years ago to have a national website. The Liberal Party opposed that. That's okay. The states are providing very useful updates, as well as the Commonwealth.
Call to the member for Jordan-Baird.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese government delivering for low-paid workers?
Call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Jordan-Baird for his question and his passionate support for workers right across this country, of course also in Melbourne. Our government is committed to get wages moving, and today our Labor government announced that we will again advocate to the Fair Work Commission for an economically sustainable real wage increase for our lowest paid workers on minimum award wages. Now, this would help almost 2.7 million workers across the country, including cleaners, retail workers, security guards, hospitality workers, many who rely on minimum award wages. These workers are often on lower wages, more likely to be women, employed on a casual basis, working part-time or younger. Our government's submission to the Fair Work Commission advocating for a real wage increase is supporting these Australians. Australians like James, who I met today, who works at security at the airport. Workers like James rely on award wages to put food on the table, pay the bills and plan for the future. James told me workers like him, and I quote, deserve a real wage increase for all the time and effort they put in and ensure that they can go home and not be stressed. He said that's exactly what a wage increase will mean. This Labor government has advocated for a wage increase for minimum award wage earners every single year that we have been in government. And since coming to government, the minimum wage has increased by more than $9,000 a year. And of course, we have legislated to protect penalty and overtime rates for these same workers because it is an important part of their pay packet. Our government is also committed to getting wages moving through reinvigorating enterprise bargaining. Under this government, we've seen record number of workers on enterprise bargaining agreements, the highest since enterprise bargaining first commenced. The most recent data shows that 2.7 million workers are on these agreements. The most recent data also shows workers covered by enterprise agreements are receiving decent annual wage increases. Whether it's sticking up for our minimum award wage earners, supporting workers getting a better deal at work, ensuring workers who are doing the same job get the same pay, it is only this Labor government that can be trusted to support workers right around this country.
The call to the member for Calais.
To the Prime Minister. Our communities are being throttled by the twin crises of the fuel supply emergency and the indefinite closure of the Great Western Highway caused by the failure of a bridge built by a convict chain gang in 1832. 1. Will you now support my fair fuel price bill that would bring in federal government fuel price controls and stop the rip-offs? 2. Will your government slash the fuel excise tax? And 3. Will you and the New South Wales government deliver a support package for our local businesses being smashed up by this highway closure?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Calais for his question and thank him as well for the courtesy of raising it with me in a meeting that we held earlier this morning. I'm always happy to meet with members of parliament, regardless of where they sit, particularly about issues relating to their local electorates. And the member for Clare is, of course, concerned about the impact that the closure of the Great Western Highway has on his electorate, because that's essentially the entry from Sydney and the Blue Mountains through to the Greater West, including Lithgow and Bathurst and Orange, and all of those people are dependent upon this road. Specialist engineers have advised the road is not safe, and it obviously can't reopen until it is safe. The member also has advised that some of the alternative routes, that there are safety issues with regard to them, and I've undertaken, I'll be raising that with the New South Wales Minister as well to make sure that those issues are dealt with. It's a serious situation. It's not a quick or a simple repair. Significant cracking and movement have been detected in the substructure of, as the member has said, it's 194 years old, Mitchell's Causeway, also known as the Convict Bridge, because literally that was when it was built. And the truth is that all governments, state and federal, probably should have done something about this quite clearly before. And the fact that it has had such an impact is indeed of real concern. On the 19th of March, the New South Wales Government announced the establishment of the Great Western Highway Community Coordination Task Force. This is designed to streamline support to those impacted by the prolonged closure of the Great Western Highway. So the member has raised the issue of businesses in that area. That will go through that particular task force as well. And I'll speak with the New South Wales Government about these issues. The New South Wales Government has announced that $50 million for the detour routes, and my office is in ongoing contact with Minister Aitchison's office. We'll continue to engage. I understand that your office has been offered a briefing by Minister Aitchison's office on the situation. If that is not the case, certainly I'll undertake to personally take that up with Jenny. She's an effective minister, and I'm sure that she will be concerned about the impact which is there.
Call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is the Albanese Labor government's cost of living help so important? And how does this compare to other approaches? Thank you.
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Speaker. The member for Tangney is a much-loved and respected member of our team, and I'm very grateful to him for our question. As the Employment Minister was saying a moment ago, the government's submission to the annual wage review today is all about a decent pay rise to help Australian workers on awards with the cost of living. We know that people are under pressure. We saw that in the inflation and confidence numbers this week. We know that they're worried about developments in the Middle East and what that means for us, especially when it comes to fuel. And from a purely economic and markets point of view, Mr Speaker, the end of the war in the Middle East can't come soon enough. But in the interim, we are working very hard, engaging with suppliers and regulators and industries, states and with our international partners to secure supply. We are doing what we can to ensure that the war is no excuse to rip people off at the Bowser. And that's why the increases to the penalties that passed the House today and hopefully the Senate this arvo are so important, Mr Speaker, to make sure that Australian motorists aren't being treated as mugs. Now, that legislation passed the House earlier today despite the bizarre efforts that we saw from the opposition. They came in here this morning, they suspended standing orders, they demanded that it be considered immediately, and then they voted against it, Mr Speaker. Then they voted against it. They gave angry speeches about how urgent it was, and then they voted to delay it, Mr Speaker. And it gets worse. When it came time for the final vote, when it came time to support the motorists and drivers of this country, they literally scurried out of the chamber, Mr Speaker, and doesn't that say it all? Now, Mr Speaker, today is not the first time that the member for Hume has voted against the interests of Australians under pressure. As it turns out, Mr Speaker, today is the one-year anniversary of the member for Hume getting all of those colleagues to vote against tax cuts for 14 million Australian workers. And 1 year ago tomorrow, he promised that if he was the Treasurer of this country, that he would repeal those tax cuts for 14 million Australians. He took to the election a policy of higher taxes, bigger deficits and more debt. If he had his way, Australians would be worse off and the budget would be weaker. And we know they haven't learned a thing from the last election. We know they haven't changed a bit because they then went and made him the leader of the opposition. But his successor as Shadow Treasurer is no better. The Shadow Treasurer has spent recent weeks betting against Australia on the share market, getting the fuel excise wrong and behaving in here like some kind of karaoke clown, Mr Speaker. But we have been dealing with these serious issues in a serious way. The tax cuts are part of that. Our efforts in fuel markets are part of that, and our efforts to get a decent pay rise for award workers are as well.
Give a call to the honourable member for Barker.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Mary Morris, a fourth-generation farmer from Udunda, needs fuel today for her tractors, for her spray unit, to seed her crop, not to mention for her truck and her utes. Mary's been told that despite her business being recategorised as critical and ordering her fuel on the 4th of March, the earliest she can expect her fuel is the 1st of April. Minister, why is Mary having to wait 4 weeks for the fuel she needs to farm?
Order. Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
The Minister for Aged Care was ceasing to. The Minister for Aged Care is warned. The Minister hasn't even begun his question. To be interjecting so disorderly is completely against the standing orders. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question. And if the honourable member wants to give me Mary's details, as other honourable members have been to see me in my office and raise cases on behalf of their constituents.
Order. The member
and
for Lyne.
I will take it up and see what can be done talking to suppliers, Mr Speaker, because I understand the pressure that Mary's under and have done that on multiple occasions for members opposite. Mr Speaker, more broadly, I will say I told the House earlier, for example, that Ampol's supply to regional South Australia is up 44%. I'm now in a position to share on behalf of the figures of Viva, the other refiner. The Deputy Prime Ministers and the member for Corangamite are very proud of our Geelong refinery, as we are, Mr Speaker. Their supply to regional Australia, year on year, 43% up in New South Wales, 22% up in Queensland, 14% up in South Australia and 8% up in Western Australia. If you take Ampol and Viva together, they are supplying a lot more petrol and diesel to regional Australia now than they were a year ago, Mr Speaker. A year ago. That is catching up with that massive increase in demand that we saw in the days following the 28th of February, Mr Speaker. So that is showing progress in a difficult circumstance, Mr Speaker. And again, this government is working across the board with industry, with states, with peak groups, with farming groups. The National Farmers Federation, I want to give a particular mention to their constructive approach with me and the Minister for Agriculture and others, and across the board, with the Treasurer and all of us, been working very constructively with us in this, because they recognise this is an internationally very difficult circumstance, and it's time for people of goodwill to come together, and that's what adults in the room do.
The call to the honourable member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services. How is the Albanese government acting to protect consumers, maintain economic stability and ensure that businesses are operating responsibly in the face of heightened global security? Volatility.
Give a call to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
I thank the member for Moore for his question and acknowledge that he's been a champion for consumers and for cost of living supports throughout his time in this chamber. Speaker, many Australians are under pressure, and recent global events are adding further stress and uncertainty. The rising cost of fuel in particular is a major challenge. Nobody, and I mean nobody, should be trying to take advantage of the conflict in the Middle East to price gouge and profiteer. I urge all business to operate responsibly and to treat their fellow Australians with respect. We are taking action to protect Australian motorists. In 2022, we increased the maximum penalty for anti-competitive behaviour fivefold to $50 million. And yesterday, the Treasurer introduced legislation after having worked with the Assistant Minister for Competition, which again will increase the maximum penalties the ACCC can hand down, taking it from $50 million to $100 million. Today, we passed that legislation through the House. Unfortunately, Speaker, as always, the opposition has been confused and opportunistic. They said that we needed to act quickly, but now they're also claiming that we're rushing things, and it's not the first time we've heard this. Well, we make no apologies for acting swiftly on these matters. And I have a message for any fuel retailers who seek to make Australians pay more than they should. It is those who are trying to make a quick buck who will ultimately pay the most. We have also extended the ACCC's petrol price monitoring program for a further 5 years and ensured it can issue infringement notices where it suspects misleading conduct. The ACCC has put the sector on notice and made clear it will not hesitate to act if laws are broken, moving quickly to safeguard supply through tightly controlled supply coordination while stepping up price surveillance and enforcement. We know that it's not just petrol and that things can be tough, and that's why our government continues to roll out responsible, targeted cost-of-living relief. This includes 2 rounds of further tax cuts for every Australian taxpayer, cutting student debt, cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare and making it easier and more affordable to see a doctor. Almost all of those measures voted against by those opposite. We're also backing increases to minimum and award wages, delivering cheaper energy, free TAFE and boosting government-funded paid parental leave. We are closely monitoring events in the Middle East and their impact on the Australian economy. And we will continue to take action to ensure that our markets operate fairly and competitively, and will continue to roll out responsible, targeted cost-of-living relief.
The call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, constituents have told me today that fuel is now $3.15 in Fowler, southwest of Sydney. Since my question to the Treasurer on Tuesday, when he failed to answer, will you follow Italy's Prime Minister and cut fuel excise temporarily to provide immediate relief at the Bowser?
Good question. Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Fowler for her question. and it goes to the pressures that people are under when costs rise. And I'd say to your constituents in Fowler two things. The first is, yes, the war in the Middle East is having an impact right around the world, whether it be in Fowler, in Grainler, whether it be in Europe, in Asia, in North America, South America, everywhere. Nowhere is immune from the impact that this Middle East war is having, and that flows down to, from an impact on the national economy, right through to an impact on individuals. And so our job is to do what we can to shield people, such as her constituent, from the worst impacts of what is a global event. Not one that we chose, not one that we're participating in, but one which impacts us. And that's why, as well as the Treasurer and Assistant Treasurer have just said, the tax cuts that have gone to every single worker in your electorate will make a difference. Some 65,000 taxpayers in your electorate alone are getting an average tax cut of more than $2,000 every year. That's why, as well, the student debt relief that helped 23,000 of your constituents will make a difference as well. The $15.7 million that's been saved on 3 million scripts in Fowler will make a difference for those constituents, as well as the 15,600 people who've gone to the Liverpool Medicare Urgent Care Clinic has made a difference as well. In addition to that,
the Prime Minister will pause the member for Fowler on a point of the Prime Minister's completed his answer. Resume your seat. The call now goes to the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management. Minister, how has the Albanese government been supporting communities impacted by severe tropical cyclone Narelle? And can you, Minister, please update on the current situation?
The call to the Minister for Emergency Management, the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lingiari for her question, and I thank her, the member for Solomon, the member for Leichhardt and the Minister for Indigenous Australians in the other place on their commitment for keeping communities informed and safe in what has been an incredibly difficult period in the north with floods and cyclones. I also want to acknowledge our emergency service workers, from the SES to health workers, first responders to our defence personnel and spontaneous volunteers who have been working incredibly hard in extremely tough conditions. Last Thursday we held 2 National Coordination Mechanism meetings for severe tropical cyclone Narelle to provide situational awareness on the weather impacts and ensure preparedness across government and agencies. NEMA activated the National Crisis Coordination Team to assist with planning for and coordination of the Australian Government's response. We've had NEMA officials embedded in Queensland, the Northern Territory and Western Australia to provide support during these events. And we've been working really closely with the Northern Territory and Queensland governments to enact a range of assistance packages. In the Northern Territory, we've activated support in 20 local government areas, with personal hardship available in 9 local government areas and 3 unincorporated areas. This is in addition to the Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment being activated in a number of areas, including Katherine, Daly River and Palumpa. We've had ADF personnel on the ground in Katherine for clean-up support, as well as helping with the evacuation of hundreds of people from Numbulwar to Darwin. We also have an AUSMAT field hospital which has been set up in East Katherine to assist with transfers from Katherine District Hospital. In Queensland, we have jointly activated disaster recovery funding arrangements in 61 local government areas. Long-term recovery will be strengthened by a suite of additional support packages worth over $107 million, funded jointly by the Albanese and Crisafulli governments. This builds on the more than $66 million in measures already announced in response to the Queensland monsoon trough, Cyclone Koji and severe weather events that commenced on the 24th of December last year. This morning in the National Situation Room I received a further updated brief, and today Tropical Cyclone Narelle will make its way down the WA coast as a severe Category 3 with wind gusts up to 185 kilometres an hour. It may strengthen to a Category 4 before it impacts the far western Pilbara coast tonight. People should stay vigilant as conditions will change quickly. Follow flood advice warnings, be prepared to enact your emergency plan and ensure your emergency kit has everything you need, including food supplies, spare batteries and important documents. I've been in contact with my WA counterpart, Minister Papalia, in the WA government and offered the Albanese government's support and assistance. Mr Speaker, disaster recovery is a long and challenging road, but the Albanese government is here for the long term and will continue to work with all the states and territories as we move from response to recovery this higher-risk weather season.
The call to the honourable member for McPherson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Godden Food, a food wholesaler who operate through my electorate between Sydney and Brisbane with 50 trucks, were told at 3 p.m. yesterday that they could not access any fuel from their distributor. They state that as a result, this will lead to an increase in food prices at the supermarket. Prime Minister, when will you take action to ensure the fuel gets to where it needs to get to?
Call to the Honourable the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. And earlier today there were two pieces of legislation before the parliament. One was on the ACCC and the increased penalties. The second went directly to the issue of trucking and transport. And indeed, what happened was that the coalition came in here and moved a suspension of standing orders to bring forward the legislation through all stages on the ACCC to increase penalties. They did that, and in that debate they said, we'll support anything to do with the fuel crisis, and it needs to be done today. Not delayed, done today. So the manager of opposition, Leader of the House moved a motion to an amendment to ensure that the two pieces of legislation that were before the House, both increased penalties for any breach and abuse of price gouging, one would have thought, something that would receive support, but also directly about trucking, directly about the question that's raised by the member for McPherson. And what? It's completely direct.
Order. Look, the Prime Minister was in the middle of talking about the question Nancy was asked, but I'll listen to the manager.
Goes to direct relevance. There's a food wholesaler who has 50 trucks that can't get fuel. That's the question.
You don't need, just to remind the manager, you don't need to explain it all. I know it's the point of relevance. So when he was asked about access and the trucks from Sydney to Gold Coast or the area from the member's electorate and the price impacts on that, and when will the Prime Minister take action? If he's talking about legislation that he's introduced or the government's done, that is action. That I think anyone. When will the Prime Minister take action to ensure fuel gets to where it is? He's giving order. He's giving information to the House, which of course is directly relevant.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I was asked about when will we take action. Today, this morning we did. What's it got to do with trucking? Well, that's what the legislation was.
Order.
You asked it to be brought forward.
Order.
You then voted against your own suspension of standing orders. And then when the legislation was put before the parliament, you scurried out. You scurried out. The Liberal Party weren't even here to vote to defend the exact circumstances raised by the member for McPherson.
Order.
And then they have the hide to the same person who moved the suspension of standing orders, writes the question, gives it to the member for McPherson and says, "Here, ask this." Well, I say to the member for McPherson who's new, you don't have to read out every question you're given. I say to the member for McPherson, be very wary of what this guy gives you.
Members on my left, enough. Members on my left.
Because we had direct legislation to make a difference before the parliament today, and they voted against it.
Order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cost of living relief by making medicines cheaper for all Australians? How are new medicines being added to the pharmaceutical benefits scheme helping to improve the lives of Australians with multiple myeloma?
Give the call to order. Members on my left, I want silence in the House. A serious question was asked by the member for Macquarie, and I'd like the minister to be heard in silence. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Macquarie. Firstly, for her support for all of the new services we've rolled out in her electorate: a new Medicare mental health centre, an endometriosis clinic, a second headspace, and of course the urgent care clinic in Windsor that opened this year. But also for her question, because she knows that there are more than 20,000 Australians today battling myeloma, and 2,500 new cases diagnosed every single year. And the 5-year survival rate for myeloma is just 60%, with 1,200 Australians or more losing their battle with this bone marrow cancer every single year. And, Mr Speaker, part of the reason why that survival rate is relatively low has been the lack of new treatments on the PBS, but that is changing. Last November, we listed the first new treatment for myeloma on the PBS for 12 years. Darzalex is a first-line treatment for people who've just been diagnosed, and before it was listed in November, it cost patients $440,000 for a course of treatment. But now, around 1,300 or 1,400 patients every single year are receiving this life-changing treatment for just PBS prices. And next week we'll list another treatment, the second in just 6 months after 12 years of nothing. Elrexfio will be available for patients whose myeloma has relapsed after several lines of other treatment. And instead of paying $5,000 for every script for this treatment, again, they'll pay no more than $25. And, Mr Speaker, I'm also pleased to say that we're very close to finalising a deal with state governments to deliver a CAR T-cell therapy, Carvicti, that was recommended to us a little while ago and has to be delivered through the state hospital system. Yesterday I met with leaders of the myeloma community, including their president, Jeff Brown, who AFL fans will remember as the former president of the Collingwood Football Club. We've forgiven him for that, but because he does such great work in his community. He was here with clinicians Hayley Beer and Professor Simon Harrison, both from the Peter Mac Centre, not just giving me advice and insights, but I know meeting members and senators across the parliament, across the political divide, and I thank people for taking those meetings and for them for coming to parliament. People like Jeff and the much-loved Sandy Roberts are the public face of this community, but behind them, literally hundreds of patients and family members and clinicians drive this vigorous community seeking to battle this insidious disease. And they all know the value and the cherished value of the PBS, bringing the best medicines from around the world to Australia at affordable prices for patients.
Call to the Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.